Hello, this is Ash Cooper and this is assignment 4.3.3. In this assignment I'll be looking at quantitative data collections. There are four ways of collecting quantitative data. This is through lab experiments, field experiments, observation, notation, analysis and questionnaires. Repeated measures is where the same participants are used in each condition, and independent groups is kind of different to that, where you use a different unrelated group in the same condition to kind of compare. The crossover design is where participants are exposed to more than one treatment, but the second condition could be affected by the first. Counterbalancing is where you change the order that you do, for example, the testing, or if you have a specific intervention during the experiment, you change the order in which the groups receive the intervention. And control groups is just the group that's kind of used to, they're tested against the experimental group, but they don't have they have different conditions of the experiment to what the experimental group has. So for example, if the experimental group has an intervention throughout the experiment, the control group wouldn't have that, just so they can compare and see if the intervention made a difference. The advantages of quantitative data is that you can control confounding variables and establish a cause and effect relationship, so you can know whether the IV affects the DV, and obviously you can get a cause and effect relationship to be used in future experiments. There's also more control for the researcher, as it's in a lab and you can control a lot more factors rather than if it was in a field or something. It also provides statistical data, so a chance that the chance probability rather than DV manipulation. So it provides statistical data as in labs you tend to be connected to electrodes and stuff like that can receive information almost immediately that can then be turned into statistical data to be analysed. Some disadvantages is that it's limitation due to ethics, because obviously during lab experiments there's a lot of ethical issues that researchers have to be mindful of. There's also a disadvantage can be participant awareness, because it's in a lab, they obviously know that they're being tested on, and of course this might change their behaviour. And it also has questionable generalizability, because if you're only doing the experiment on one person, you can't really generalize it to a wider population. Firstly, we look at lab experiments. There's three types of lab experiments. There's a true experiment, a pre-experiment, and a quasi-experiment. In a true experiment, it has at least random assignment, pre and post treatment, including interventions, and also a control group. Pre-experiments have random assignment, pre and post treatment, like interventions, etc., but they don't have a control group. A quasi-experiment has pre and post treatments, and also has a control group, but doesn't have any random assignment. Advantage of lab experiments is it's in a controlled environment, extraneous variables and confounded variables are controlled. It's also high in internal validity, because you're the one who's obviously conducting the research and you can get results that are fairly accurate. And it's also replicable, because of the kind of machines you're using are going to be gold standard, and you can obviously repeat that using the same equipment with another participant. The disadvantage is it's low in ecological validity, which just means that obviously it's not in the field of work that the participant is used to, so that might change the results received. It's also very expensive, because some of the equipment used could be gold standard, which of course is very expensive. There's also demand characteristics as a disadvantage, which is where the participant might feel like they need to please the researcher and either just kind of try and manipulate the actual way that they would act if they didn't know that they were being tested upon. And there's also evaluation apprehension, which is where the participant might feel like they're going to be judged at the end of the research, so they kind of not act as normally as they should, which makes results a little bit invalid. And there's also another disadvantage is social desirability, which is where the participant again might act differently when they're being tested upon to kind of please more socially. Next, we look at field experiments. It's kind of an environment more normal to the performer. So, for example, a gymnast, if they were tested, British gymnast, if they're tested in their local gymnasium or wherever they perform their local gymnastics stuff, that will kind of be like an environment that's more normal to them rather than in a lab. An advantage for this is it's more ecologically valid, which means, of course, the participant is doing what they do in a natural environment that they're used to, which increases the validity. It's also cheaper and more accessible because you don't have to use as much scientific equipment and stuff like that. And there's also reduced in demand characteristics, because during a field experiment the participants might not necessarily know that they're being observed, and so they won't feel like they need to change up. A disadvantage to this is it's potentially time consuming. Another disadvantage is it's difficult to control confounding variables due to being in an environment that's obviously more normal to the performer, and you don't really have too much control over what's going on. Next, we look at observational notation analysis. This is purely observational, and you just annotate what happens. There's no manipulation from researcher, so it's not like an experiment where you might manipulate the IV to see if it affects the DV. Here there's no manipulation, it's just you're just purely watching and annotating what happens. An advantage is it can be videoed or audio recorded. It also values all contributions. So, for example, if you were to miss a contribution to a team sport, for example, like if your team wins 3-1, initially all the credit's going to go to the striker and stuff, but if you then use observational notation analysis and watch the video back and stuff like that, you can then be able to recall certain like aspects of the game that maybe weren't looked at that were vital to winning that game. It also allows comparison, so if you watch the video back or have audio recorded, you can then re-watch that and then compare it to something else, and it also shows strengths and weaknesses. Some disadvantages: it requires several observers in order to try and not miss any data and make it more valid. It also requires training from the researcher. It's quite hard to do, so it requires a trained researcher, and it also might miss some behaviors. For example, if you do audio recording of a participant and you're asking them certain questions, you might like miss some behaviors that are quite pivotal to the answers that you're getting back, due to the fact that it's just audio and you can't see stuff like body language and that kind of stuff. Next, I look at questionnaires. Questionnaires can be kind of paper-based or electronic, and it's just they're mainly used to just get information out of participants by researchers. And there's 3 types of questionnaires, as we looked at in a previous assignment. There's structured, unstructured, and semi-structured. Structured is just a set of questions already planned before the questionnaire or interview. And then there can be unstructured kind of questionnaires, where you might ask a question, but then it allows kind of follow-up questions and also probing. Unstructured has no questions planned. It has a starting question, but then you go into the interview, and then off the starting question you have to follow up and probe with whatever the participant is saying. You can allow follow-up questions, but there's no planned questions rather than the initial starting question. And semi-structured, which is what I got confused with earlier, is the one where there's planned questions, but it allows kind of like probing and follow-up questions towards the questions that you already have. So it's not as rigid as structured questions, where you're only asking the questions you've already planned. Advantage to questionnaires: it's fast data collection. structured questionnaire can also have analytical data that can be obviously analyzed in numbers and be more kind of, it can then be generalized and to the public. It's also easy to administer questionnaires. You can either have them more paper-based, like I said, or electronically, where you just send them out. Some disadvantages is there could be misinterpretations of data through questionnaires. So, for example, a participant could say something, and you write down some, and they might write down something, but you kind of misinterpret what they mean, which gives it low validity. And it's also potentially time consuming due to requiring a large sample size when you're processing and analyzing the data in order to generalize it to the public.